Okay, this is my final test run before Friday, and this is going to be using the new route that I've decided upon. This time we're not using the edge of the map, we're working entirely within the confines of the map. And lifting gear up. The nacelles at 75 degrees. And that's where they'll pretty much stay until get very close to the LZ. So this route was a little bit more intensive a process to select than usual because of this mission's demands, specifically that we have to remain at low altitude and below the terrain to avoid radar detection. And so this entire route really takes us along the valley floors of the map to stay below that terrain. This really requires that speed be a little bit lower than what it might otherwise be, because if you are moving along here at the top speeds of this aircraft and you try and hit a turn, there's a good chance A, that you won't make it when going through some of the tighter canyons, and B, even if you do make it, it's very easy to balloon the aircraft if you don't get things just right, and then you are going to be lit up by radar. So I don't need to be all the way down there, but I do need to be below the highest terrain on all sides. So even there at that speed, I ballooned just a little bit. So I should make a note to slow down a bit for that turn and put something to remind myself about that turn, because that, I think, currently is the tightest turn in this entire route. The other thing that you really have to worry about in this aircraft is with those really aggressive turns where you're banking quite a bit. The more you bank, the more your vector from the nacelles is going horizontal instead of vertical, and therefore the less lift you have. And so accordingly, the more you bank, generally speaking, the more you are bumping up the throttle to compensate. Of course, that only goes so far. Eventually, you tilt the aircraft such that the nacelles are fully horizontal, in which case adding more power won't do you one bit of good. So much of the challenge of learning to maneuver this aircraft effectively through aggressive turns is knowing A, how far you can go, and B, given however far you're going, how much you need to compensate using the throttle. Another thing about those turns is that you can save yourself a lot of hassle by using the air brake going into a turn that you think you might be going a little bit fast on, because the air brake really is essential in very quickly reducing the speed of the aircraft, much more so than dropping the throttle. But not only that, but the air brake, if you hit that, that doesn't, at least immediately, affect your lift in the way that changing the throttle does, and so there's less compensation for that change that's required. By contrast, if you are dropping the throttle, you immediately need to consider that that's going to reduce the lift being produced by the aircraft, and that's just one more thing to consider. Now, technically, hitting the air brake is going to affect the amount of lift that the aircraft is generating, but indirectly through slowing the aircraft, meaning that the wings will generate less lift. So it's a second of order effect compared to working with the throttle. Anyway, one thing I need to work on here is to try not to follow this road too closely. Usually you can cut over these corners and still be below the hillsides on either side. And if you're below the hillsides on either side, you are mastering the radar, and that is entirely sufficient. Getting too low in this canyon isn't really helping anybody. And it does make the whole process much more, well, taxing. All I gotta do is dodge these little things that jut out from that canyon side. I should probably put a reminder down on this route to have the co-pilot let me know that when I get to that spot I need to cut the corners and not get too low. See, when you're flying a route like this, it is really occupying all of your attention, so it's good to put down reminders, and it's good to have someone feeding those reminders to you at the right time. And, well, that's one very useful thing the co-pilot can do. Alright, so coming up to the point around this bend where we take a little detour from the road, since it doesn't stay at the bottom of this canyon but instead heads up the hill. In fact, there's really no good way out of this canyon, but the route here takes a slightly better route over a shorter ridge, and it's more direct, and so that's why we're deviating from the road. Here. And we cut through here, try not to get too high. And then cut through this valley, which takes us back to the road. And then we're going to take a left back onto that road. And then a bit after that, we'll be taking a right off of the road into the valley in which the LZ is. And that's coming up here right around this bend. Right there is where we need to go. And at that point, nacelles up to 90 degrees. Hit the air brake to slow down. Find the exact spot and come to a stop and nice static cover around 13 meters, which I think is 45 feet. All right. And we're stable. Ropes would be out now. And we're really nice and stable. That's beautiful. All right. About now they'd be cutting the ropes. And let's say ropes are cut, and we can start pushing off here. Spin it around. And we're on our way out. I believe the plan at this point is to head to some kind of hold point, given the very low ceiling on this mission, at least at this stage. I would imagine we'd have to set it down. I think an orbit is out of the question, at least anywhere near the AO. But for the purpose of this, I'm just going to work my way back to the airfield. And at this point, I'll drop the nacelles back to 75 degrees. So what you'll see with the nacelles at 75 degrees is that spending most of my time here pretty close to about 50% on the throttle, and when I do that, that results in a very controllable airspeed of 100 knots with the ability to very easily go faster or slower just by adding or removing throttle. And see, I slightly missed where the path was through there, but that's okay. Just trying not to balloon too much there as I go over the top. And get back down. One note about flying this aircraft is if you do find yourself sinking into the terrain, maybe you've made a turn that was too aggressive, you ended up a bit nose down, and you need to pull it up, or you're flying towards terrain and you didn't really account for it. If you have the nacelles, at anything greater than 0 degrees, it's important to remember that you really have two tools to get the aircraft back up there. One being, of course, to pull the nose up. It's obvious choice, but the other being, of course, to increase the throttle, because that's going to increase the lift. You'll note there that I actually did sink a little bit in that turn, and I ended up both pulling the nose up and adding to the throttle. It's also not really relevant today, but another really useful trick with this aircraft when you're actually trying to land it is to make sure that you have a proper head tracking solution, but in particular with the ability to move the head forward and to the side, because the best way to land the aircraft precisely is to stick your head forward and to the right there and give yourself a lot more view looking right there. In fact, you can do even better by bringing the aircraft to the intended landing point a little bit out of trim with the nose off to the left and basically just fly it, you know, kind of like this. That's going to increase your visibility exactly where you need it. And then right as you're about to touch down, you can just give it a little bit of pedal to bring the aircraft back into alignment with the direction of travel. You know, it's not a huge advantage, but you know, every little advantage you can get helps. And in a a medium to large aircraft like this, where you don't have a lot of visibility right here in the center, being able to get some of that visibility back really helps. But you know, really, the important thing there is a lot of people who have the head tracking may have the side-to-side translation movement, but they don't have the front-to-back translation movement. So just center my track IR here so I can demonstrate that a little bit more. So right, I can move my head forward in the aircraft, and backward in the aircraft, and up and down, and left and right. And you know, each one of those movements ends up being really useful for maintaining visibility where I need it at all times. I think the ARMA default is for a forward head movement to zoom in and a backward head movement to zoom out, and that always drives me crazy. I want to control my zoom a little bit differently than that. So the zooming is a much more drastic thing than moving the head forward a foot or so, or a foot or two. So yeah, there's always unintentional head movements when you're using track IR, and it would drive me crazy if I'm unintentionally zooming in and out. But having that head movement, that is much preferable, I think. This is one of the longer routes I can remember taking on an insert. But that is what happens when you've got to stay really low. Missed the turn a little bit there. And you can see there, as I made a really sharp turn, and also dropped to pretty close to zero airspeed, I did have to bring the throttle pretty close to 100% to arrest the descent. Oops, a little bit off course there. You really do need to be quick on the throttle when you're flying low level in this aircraft or a nap of the earth, because if you are making those sharp turns, again, you can end up sinking pretty fast, and if you don't compensate pretty much immediately, you are going to be impacting the terrain. Of course, the number one thing that you can do to keep ahead of that is to keep your eyes on the velocity vector, because if you see that ball dropping when you don't want it to be dropping, well, you can react immediately as opposed to going based off of visual reference of the terrain, which, while it works, is a lot slower and a lot less precise. If you got the velocity vector, you might as well use it. Okay, I see that we're basically at the airfield here, and I didn't notice that. So I'm going to climb up a little bit here, get eyes on it. And gears down. One of the times I came this way, because the airfield is a little bit higher than what our route was below, I undershot, and I didn't give it enough power to get up here, nearly clipped a tree. And so this time I have to remember to gain a little bit of altitude first so that I can come in on a descent instead of a climb, which is always awkward. Alright, well, there we have it.